King Solomon, hailed as the wisest man to ever live, was a king blessed by God with unparalleled wisdom, staggering wealth, and unrivaled power. But how could such a man, favored by the Creator himself, end his life in despair, regret, and spiritual ruin? What went wrong in the life of this extraordinary ruler who once seemed destined for eternal greatness? Join us as we unveil the untold story of Solomon's final days. A day steeped in reflections of glory lost, tragic missteps, and the devastating consequences of turning away from God. This is not just the story of a king. It is a story that echoes through the ages, speaking to anyone who has ever wrestled with pride, temptation, or the allure of worldly desires. It is a cautionary tale that could change the way you see your own life. So, stay with us until the end to uncover the timeless lessons from Solomon's rise and fall, lessons that hold the power to transform us today. If this journey inspires you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chance to explore more life-changing stories. Your support helps us continue sharing powerful biblical insights and valuable lessons. We also encourage you to share your thoughts below. What strikes you most about Solomon's journey? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to share this video with friends and family, because these eternal truths are meant to be shared. Now, let us step into the final chapter of Solomon's life, a chapter filled with breathtaking highs and heartbreaking lows, and uncover the deeper meaning of his story. Solomon's reign began with unmatched promise. As the son of King David and Bathsheba, Solomon was chosen by God to inherit the throne of Israel, a throne that carried the weight of divine favor and an eternal covenant. From the very start, Solomon's journey was guided by God's hand. In 1 Kings 3 verse 5, we read of a moment that would shape history. God appeared to Solomon in a dream and said, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." What Solomon requested in that moment was not wealth, power, or the defeat of his enemies, desires that might consume lesser men. Instead, in 1 Kings 3 verse 9, Solomon humbly asked, "Give your servant an understanding heart to govern your people and to discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" Moved by Solomon's selfless plea, God granted him wisdom unlike any the world had seen. But God went further, promising Solomon riches, honor, and long life, on the condition that he would remain faithful to God's commands. 1 Kings 3 verses 10 to 14. Almost immediately, Solomon's wisdom was tested. Two women, both claiming to be the mother of the same child, came before him seeking judgment. Solomon's solution, offering to divide the living child in two, revealed the true mother's heart, as she would rather surrender her child than see him harmed. The people of Israel stood in awe, for they recognized God's wisdom at work through their king. 1 Kings 3 verses 16 to 28. From that moment, Solomon's fame spread across nations. In 1 Kings 4 verses 29 to 30, it is written, "God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. He authored 3,000 proverbs and over 1,000 songs, delving into the mysteries of life, nature, leadership, and faith." 1 Kings 4 verse 32. His wisdom drew the attention of the powerful Queen of Sheba, who traveled a great distance to test his intellect. After witnessing Solomon's unparalleled wisdom and prosperity, she confessed in 1 Kings 10 verse 7, "Not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth, you have far exceeded the report I heard." Solomon's crowning achievement, however, was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, a vision conceived by his father, King David, but fulfilled through Solomon's reign. This temple, described in 1 Kings 6, was an architectural marvel, built from the finest materials: cedar from Lebanon, gold, silver, and bronze. It became the spiritual heart of Israel, where God's presence dwelled among his people. During the temple's dedication, Solomon offered a heartfelt prayer, recorded in 1 Kings 8 verse 23, proclaiming, "Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below, who keeps his covenant of love with those who serve him wholeheartedly." Under Solomon, Israel reached the pinnacle of wealth, power, and influence. His kingdom became a beacon to the world, attracting traders, scholars, and rulers from every corner of the ancient world. The Bible recounts in 1 Kings 10 verses 23 to 24 that Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than any king on earth, with leaders traveling far and wide to hear the wisdom God had placed in his heart. But with unimaginable wealth came unimaginable temptation. Solomon's vast power led him to form political alliances through marriage, defying God's clear command. In 1 Kings 11 verses 1 to 2, we learn that Solomon loved many foreign women, Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians, and Hittites, women from nations God had warned against intermarrying with, for they would lead his heart astray. Ignoring these warnings, Solomon amassed 700 wives and 300 concubines. 1 Kings 11 verse 3. The consequences were catastrophic. As Solomon grew older, these women turned his heart toward foreign gods, including Ashtoreth, Molech, and Chemosh. Despite all his wisdom, Solomon allowed his devotion to God to waver. In 1 Kings 11 verse 4, the tragedy of his choices becomes clear. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. God was angered by Solomon's disobedience and declared in 1 Kings 11 verse 11, "Since you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." Though the division of the kingdom would not happen during Solomon's lifetime, his choices set the stage for Israel's fracture. In the twilight of his life, Solomon reflected on the vanity of his pursuits. In the book of Ecclesiastes, he wrote, "Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless." Ecclesiastes 1 verse 2. These words reveal the emptiness of a life consumed by worldly desires and separated from God. Solomon's life is a stark reminder of how even the wisest among us are vulnerable to pride, temptation, and the distractions of wealth. His story teaches us to guard our hearts, to remain faithful to God, and to remember that true wisdom lies in obedience to his word. King Solomon's marriages were far more than political maneuvers. They were acts of rebellion against God's clear command. In Deuteronomy 17 verse 17, God warned the kings of Israel not to take many wives, lest their hearts be led astray. Yet, as Solomon's reign unfolded, his numerous foreign wives began to steer him down a perilous path. 1 Kings 11 verse 4 tells us, "As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been." How could the wisest man to ever live fall so far? Despite the unmatched wisdom God had bestowed upon him, Solomon allowed his love for these women to overshadow his devotion to the God of Israel. This wasn't merely a personal failing. It was a spiritual crisis that rippled across his kingdom. His disobedience took a visible and damning form. The construction of high places, altars on elevated grounds where sacrifices were offered to foreign gods. Solomon built altars to Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, a deity tied to fertility and sensuality, whose worship directly opposed the holiness of God. 1 Kings 11 verse 5. He erected high places for Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, both of whom demanded practices as detestable as child sacrifice. 1 Kings 11 verses 7 to 8. These acts weren't mere gestures of cultural diplomacy. They were blatant violations of God's commandments. God had explicitly instructed the Israelites in Deuteronomy 12 verses 2 to 3 to destroy every high place dedicated to false gods, not to create new ones. Solomon, in his moral compromise, ignored the very wisdom he had once prayed for, the ability to discern between good and evil. The irony is heartbreaking. The king who had astounded the world with his discernment was now blinded by his own desires, entangled in idolatry. God had warned of this danger long before Solomon ever ascended the throne. In Deuteronomy 7 verses 3 to 4, he commanded, "Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods." Yet, despite the clarity of these words, Solomon's heart was seduced. His divided loyalty stood in stark contrast to his father David, who, though imperfect, remained steadfast in his devotion to the Lord. God's displeasure was evident. Twice, the Lord appeared to Solomon, once at Gibeon and again in Jerusalem, reaffirming his covenant and cautioning the king to walk faithfully in his ways. In 1 Kings 9 verses 6-7, God warned, "But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them." Yet Solomon, hardened in his disobedience, persisted in building shrines and participating in idolatrous worship. The judgment was swift. 1 Kings 11 verses 9-10 reveals God's anger. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. The tragedy of Solomon's life is a sobering reminder. The man who once possessed unparalleled wisdom and divine favor allowed his heart to be seduced by worldly desires and the influence of those around him. In 1 Kings 11 verse 11, God declared, "Since this is your attitude and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." This prophecy marked the unraveling of Israel's unity. The golden age Solomon had built with God's blessing was now on a collision course with division, conflict, and decline. Yet even in judgment, God's mercy shone through. For the sake of David, Solomon's father, the kingdom would not be torn away during Solomon's lifetime. Instead, the full weight of the consequences would fall upon his son, Rehoboam, 1 Kings 11 verses 12-13. God's pronouncement was soon followed by a striking symbol of his judgment. In 1 Kings 11 verses 29-31, the prophet Ahijah met Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, outside Jerusalem. Tearing his cloak into 12 pieces, Ahijah declared, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." This moment foreshadowed the division that would fracture Israel after Solomon's death. As the end of his life approached, Solomon, once celebrated as the wisest, richest, and most powerful king, sat in his palace, reflecting on his legacy. His reign had been marked by incredible achievements, wisdom that astounded nations, wealth that surpassed imagination, and a kingdom that reached the pinnacle of its power. Yet his final days were not filled with the satisfaction of accomplishment, but with the bitterness of regret. In his later years, Solomon penned the book of Ecclesiastes, a profound reflection on the emptiness of life without God. In Ecclesiastes 1 verse 2, he laments, "Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless." These words echo the desolation he felt as he looked back on a life that had strayed from its divine purpose. Despite all his wisdom and success, Solomon had lost sight of the God who had given him everything. His reflections are hauntingly honest. In Ecclesiastes 2 verses 10-11, he writes, "I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun." Solomon's life is a powerful cautionary tale, a reminder that no amount of wisdom, wealth, or power can fill the void left by a heart that strays from God. His story challenges us to remain faithful, to guard against the seductive pull of worldly desires, and to anchor our lives in obedience to God's word. Let Solomon's rise and fall teach us that true fulfillment is found not in the fleeting treasures of this world, but in a steadfast relationship with the one who gives life meaning. King Solomon, the once great king of Israel, spent his life building magnificent palaces, planting vast vineyards, amassing treasures, and even importing exotic animals to adorn his kingdom. He surrounded himself with a retinue of servants and musicians, indulging in every pleasure life could offer. Yet, in his twilight years, all these accomplishments felt empty. The man who had it all realized too late that he had lost what mattered most, his connection with God. In Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10, Solomon poignantly observed, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income." This too is meaningless. These words were not just an observation. They were the lament of a man who had chased after wealth and worldly pleasures, only to find them hollow. Solomon had pursued the world but lost his way with God. In his youth, Solomon's relationship with God had been close and personal. He built the temple in Jerusalem, the pinnacle of his reign and a lasting symbol of God's presence among his people. He had walked in the favor of the Lord, endowed with unparalleled wisdom and abundance. Yet, as time passed, Solomon's many marriages, alliances with foreign nations, and compromises with idolatry slowly pulled him away from the God who had blessed him so abundantly. He forsook the God of his youth, the same God who had appeared to him in dreams and granted him wisdom greater than any other man. Through his writings, we glimpse a man who had seen life in all its fullness, the heights of joy and the depths of despair. In Proverbs 3 verses 5-6, Solomon once advised others, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." But tragically, he himself failed to heed this wisdom. In his relentless pursuit of earthly pleasures, Solomon leaned on his own understanding, forsaking the straight path God had laid before him. As the end of his life drew near, Solomon's reflections grew sharper and more profound. In Ecclesiastes 12 verse 13, he wrote what would become his final and most important piece of advice. "Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." These words, written after a lifetime of both glory and regret, reveal the ultimate truth Solomon had come to understand. Nothing in life matters apart from a heart devoted to God. Solomon's final days serve as a stark reminder of the fleeting nature of worldly pursuits. Though he had been granted unparalleled wisdom, wealth, and power, he allowed his heart to be led astray by the very blessings he once cherished. In the end, he recognized that all his achievements, his palaces, vineyards, treasures, and indulgences, were nothing without God. In Ecclesiastes 7 verse 29, Solomon expressed a painful truth. "This only have I found. God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes. Even the wisest man on earth fell victim to his own schemes, entangled in a web of compromises and distractions that pulled him farther from his Creator." His story is a powerful warning to anyone who places their hope in the things of this world rather than in the eternal promises of God. Solomon's life is a sobering lesson on the dangers of drifting away from God. The king who began his reign with divine favor and unmatched promise ended his days in deep regret. His wisdom, wealth, and power, so extraordinary in the eyes of the world, proved to be meaningless without a heart fully devoted to the Lord. As Solomon reflected on his life, he left us with a lasting legacy, a call to fear God and obey his commandments. His final words remind us that our purpose is not found in what we build, accumulate, or achieve, but in the relationship we nurture with our Creator. The last day of King Solomon's life was not a celebration of his earthly triumphs, but a solemn reflection on what he had lost. Let us take his story to heart, for it's not how we begin but how we finish that defines us. May we all strive to remain faithful to God, keeping our hearts anchored in him until the very end. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Solomon. If you found this story inspiring and thought-provoking, please like, subscribe, and share. And remember, true wisdom is not found in the riches of this world, but in following God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Let Solomon's story guide us toward a life of lasting purpose and eternal significance.